The town was named San Judas, which felt about right. It was a place where hope came to be betrayed, a scab of dried mud and warped lumber clinging to the edge of the New Mexico territory. Dust was the only true citizen. It coated the tongues of the thirsty, settled in the creases of every face, and buried the dead. Elias Granger rode his horse, Old Tom, down the main street, which was just a wide path of ruts. He was a man made of long silences and hard angles, his face weathered by a sun that had tried to burn him away for 40 years. He was just passing through, needing salt, cartridges, and a bag of oats. He tied his horse to a hitching post outside the dry goods store, the leather of his saddle creaking like a tired joint. He was walking toward the mercantile when he heard it. It was not a gunshot, and it was not a shout. It was a sound that did not belong, a muffled, desperate cry that the wind almost stole. He paused, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Not to draw it, but just as a habit. He looked around. The street was nearly empty. A few men lounged outside the saloon, spitting tobacco into the dust. He turned his head, listening. It came again, from behind the livery barn. Elias was not a man who went looking for trouble. He had seen enough trouble to fill a dozen lifetimes, and he carried the ghosts of everyone. But he also was not a man who could hear that sound and just walk away. It was the sound of something small and cornered. He walked slow, his boots making no sound in the thick dust. He rounded the corner of the barn, staying in the shadow thrown by the afternoon sun. What he saw stopped his heart cold. It was not a fight, it was a trade. A wagon, heavy built with a canvas cover, stood waiting. 2 armed men, their faces blank and mean, were loading cargo. The cargo was women. There were 4 of them, chained at the ankle and wrist, connected by a long coffle chain. They were dressed in rags that might have once been dresses. They were branded by dirt and bruises. Elias had seen cattle handled with more care. One of the men, a thick-bodied brute with a stained beard, shoved a young woman toward the wagon steps. She stumbled, the chain yanking the woman behind her to her knees. "Hey, get up, you!" the guard growled, kicking the fallen woman in the ribs. Elias felt a familiar, cold sickness rise in his throat. This was 1873. The war was over. Newspapers said the world had been remade, that men were free. But Elias knew the newspapers lied. The world had not changed. It just found new words for old sins. He watched from the shadow as the first 2 women were forced into the darkness of the wagon. Then his eyes locked on the last one in line. She was younger than the others, maybe not even 20. Her skin was the color of strong tea, and her black hair was matted with grime and blood from a cut on her cheek. She was bruised, her lips split, but she was not crying. She stood straight as the chain would allow, and her eyes, dark and deep, were scanning the alley. They were not searching for help. They looked like they were memorizing the faces of her captors, etching them into her mind for a judgment day she still believed in. Then she saw him. Her eyes met Elias's. He was 20 yards away, half hidden by the corner of the barn. She did not call out. She did not beg. She just looked at him. And in that gaze, he saw a whole world of fire and defiance being smothered. She held his gaze for 1, 2, 3 seconds. He saw her register him, a man, free, watching. And he did not move. He did not act. A sick shame, hot and sharp, twisted in his gut. The man in charge stepped out of the livery shadow. He was clean-shaven, save for a neat gray mustache. He wore a good coat, gray like his eyes, and a planter's hat. He smoked a thin cigar. "Hurry it up, Hutch. We need to be clear of this town before sundown." Elias's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. He knew that face. Silas Croft. It had been 10 years. Croft had been a colonel then, a man who gave orders that smelled of sulfur and madness. Elias had ridden under him for 6 terrible months, a lifetime ago, during a part of the war he never, ever spoke of. Croft had been a man who believed in purifying the world with fire, who saw weakness as a disease to be cut out. Croft saw the girl staring, and he followed her gaze. He squinted toward the shadows where Elias stood. Elias did not breathe. He blended back, melting deeper into the darkness. Croft grunted, dismissing it. He walked over to the girl and took her by the chin, forcing her face up. "This one," he said to the guard, his voice calm, "is the defiant one. She will need the most correction. See that she gets it." The guard, Hutch, grinned. "Yes, sir, Colonel." "Just Mr. Croft now." Croft corrected him, but his eyes were pleased. He turned back to the girl. "You have a name." The girl said nothing. She just stared at him with that burning, silent hatred. Croof slapped her, a sharp, cracking sound that echoed off the barn wall. "I asked you your name." She tasted the blood at her lip and, very slowly, spat it onto the dust near his boot. Croft's eyes narrowed. He did not hit her again. He just smiled. A terrible, thin smile. "You will learn. Put her in." Hutch grabbed the girl, Lila, though Elias did not know her name, and shoved her hard toward the wagon. She stumbled on the step, falling forward into the black interior. The heavy door was slammed shut. A thick bar dropped into place. Elias heard the metallic sound of a padlock clicking. He stood there, frozen in the shadow, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He watched Silas Croft mount a fine-looking horse, watched the wagon lurch forward, pulled by 4 heavy mules. The 2 guards rode alongside, rifles in their saddle scabbards. They moved east, out of town, toward the high, empty desert. Elias Granger turned and walked back to the street, his legs feeling heavy, as if he were the one in chains. That night, Elias did not take a room at the boarding house. He made his camp a mile outside of San Judas, down in a dry wash where his small fire would not be seen. The air was already cold, carrying the first hint of the high-country winter that was barreling down from the north. He sat with his back against his saddle, a tin cup of bitter coffee in one hand and a bottle of cheap whiskey at his side. He did not drink much, usually, but tonight he drank. He drank to burn away the image of that girl's eyes. It did not work. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the immense, dark sky. He stared into the flames, and the flames showed him things he had spent his life trying to forget. He saw a farmhouse in Tennessee, its curtains burning. He was 20 years old, wearing a gray uniform that was still new. Colonel Croft was there, sitting on his horse. Just like today, they had been told the farmer was a Union spy. When they arrived, there was just the farmer, his wife, and 2 children. Croft had given the order. Elias had stood by his horse, his rifle heavy in his hands, and watched the other men drag the family out. He had watched them set the torch to the barn. He had watched the farmer fight, and he had watched him die. He had not fired his rifle. He had not raised his voice. He had done nothing. He just watched, his stomach churning. While Croft lit a cigar in the glow of the burning house, he had failed to stop it. He took a long pull from the whiskey bottle. The liquor was raw. The flames shifted, and the vision changed. He was not in Tennessee. He was home, in Texas, 8 years earlier. He was 15. He was supposed to be watching his younger sister, Sarah. She was 9, all sharp elbows and bright laughter. He was supposed to be mending a fence, but the day was hot, and the creek was calling. He had left her sitting on the porch, telling him to catch a big fish. "Do not be long, Elias," she had called. He was gone for 2 hours. When he came back, the fish pole slipping in his sweaty hand, the house was quiet, too quiet. He found her behind the smokehouse. Raiders. They had come and gone like ghosts, taking 2 horses and his father's good rifle. And they had taken Sarah. He found her. She had fought. Elias closed his eyes, the cup in his hand shaking. He had failed to stop that, too. He had buried her himself, his father too broken to hold the shovel. He opened his eyes. The fire was just embers. The bottle was half empty. He saw the girl's face again. Lila. He saw the bruise on her cheek, the defiance in her eyes. He saw the chain, and he saw Silas Croft, the man who represented the sickness of the war, the sickness that had let men burn farms and steal children. He had failed the farmer. He had failed Sarah. He would not, he thought, his hand tightening around the cup, fail this girl. He needed to know where they were going. He threw the dregs of his coffee onto the fire, saddled old Tom, and rode back into the sleeping town. The saloon was still lit. He pushed through the bat-wing doors. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. He walked to the bar and ordered a whiskey he did not want. The liveryman who owned the barn was at a corner table, drinking with another man. Elias drifted closer, pretending to watch the sleeping bartender. Sold the whole lot to Croft, the liveryman was saying, his voice slurring. Got a good price, too. Said he's taken him up to the Silver Peak mines, up in the high Uintas. That is hell's own country, the other man said. Hundreds of miles. Nothing but desert and then mountains. They will never make it afore the snows. Not my concern, the liveryman shrugged. They are contracted labor. Croft has the papers, all legal. He has taken him up there to work in the kitchens, do the laundry, says he is reforming them. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. A remote settlement like that, nobody to hear him scream. He can reform 'em all he wants. Elias finished his whiskey in one swallow, the liquid fire searing his throat. He put the glass down quietly and walked out. He had what he needed. Silver Peak. Hundreds of miles of desert and mountain, a place where the law did not exist. He thought about it for a minute. He could just ride west. He could forget. He could be in California in 2 months. But he knew he would not. Sarah's ghost would ride with him. And now, this new girl's ghost would be there too. He tried the law, just to say he had. The sheriff's office was dark, but a light was on in the back room. He knocked. A deputy, young and arrogant, opened the door, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His badge was pinned crooked on his long underwear. What? I need to report a crime, Elias said, his voice flat. A wagon train that left today, headed for Silver Peak. They're trafficking women. The deputy stared at him, then he laughed. Trafficking? Mister, those are laborers. All got contracts. Saw the papers myself. Signed and sealed. They were in chains. Elias said, The man leading them is Silas Croft. The deputy's smile faded. He looked Elias up and down, taking in the worn clothes, the old gun belt. Silas Croft is a respectable businessman. He is bringing order to the territories. Now, you best move along. We do not like drifters causing trouble here. A girl was beaten. Elias pressed, his voice low. The deputy's hand moved to his own pistol, resting on the desk inside. You best listen close, the deputy said, his voice turning hard. Those women are property. One way or another, contracted, bought. It does not matter. The law is not interested. And you want to die for a girl, Cowboy, because that is what will happen. You ride after Croft. You will end up in a shallow grave. If you are lucky. Elias looked at the deputy's soft face, at the tin badge that meant nothing. He saw the truth there. The law was in on it, or just too scared to be against it. He was alone. All right, Elias said, backing away. I am just tired. I will be riding on in the morning. See that you do, the deputy said, and slammed the door. Elias walked back to his camp. He did not sleep. He checked his Winchester rifle, cleaning the barrel until it shone. He counted his cartridges. 44. He packed his saddlebags, jerky, hardtack, a small sack of coffee, a tin plate, and his cup. He filled his canteen. He took the blanket from his bedroll and strapped it behind his saddle. He was traveling light. He would have to move fast. He took a small piece of paper from his pouch and a stub of pencil. He hesitated, then wrote, "I owe a debt. Going to pay it. If I do not return, it means I am settled." It had no name. It was for no one. It was just a mark to say he had been there. He folded it and tucked it under the cold ashes of his fire, placing a small rock on top. Before the first hint of dawn colored the sky, Elias Granger put his foot in the stirrup and swung onto old Tom. He settled into the saddle, the familiar creak of the leather a small comfort. He looked east, toward the dark line of hills the wagon had taken. He neutered his horse forward, leaving the sleeping, corrupt town of San Judas behind. He rode out alone, a single dark figure against the vast, cold emptiness of the desert. Inside the wagon, it was agony. The space was cramped, meant for cargo, not people. The air was suffocating, thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and the ammonia of the slop bucket in the corner. Lila lay on the rough plank floor, curled on her side. Every jolt of the wagon wheels sent a fresh, searing bolt of pain through her ribs. She breathed in shallow, careful gasps. She had not made a sound since the beating. Beside her, the youngest girl, Beth, was crying. It was a thin, hopeless sound, the kind that grated on the nerves. "Hush, child," one of the older women whispered, her voice rough. "Crying only makes them meaner." Beth just cried harder. Lila closed her eyes. She tried to go somewhere else. She tried to remember her mother's face, tried to recall the songs she used to sing on the back porch of their small cabin in Texas. It seemed 100 years ago. They had been free then, or so they were told. But freedom had just been another word. When her mother died, the man who owned the land said they owed him money. And when they could not pay, he had sold them, sold her, and sold her contract. The wagon hit a deep rut, and Lila could not stop the grunt of pain that escaped her lips. Beth sniffled and crawled closer, huddling against Lila's back. She was trembling. "It hurts," Beth whispered. "I know," Lila whispered back. The words felt like gravel in her throat. She turned her head away, facing the canvas wall. The wagon was swaying, the wheels grinding over rock. She listened to the guards outside, their rough laughter, the jingle of their spurs. She was alone. They were all alone, together in this darkness. She whispered her name to no one, just to the dark, swaying air. "Lila?" She said it like a prayer. She said it like a curse. It was the only thing she owned. The wagon train crossed out of the flat desert and began to climb into the foothills. The terrain grew rough. The wagon tilted at dangerous angles, throwing the women against each other. The cries of the others were a constant, low moan. On the second day, the guard named Hutch rode back and unbarred the door. The sudden light made them all flinch. His shadow fell over them. "You," he said, pointing at Beth. "The colonel wants to see you." Beth screamed, a high, terrified sound, and scrambled behind the biggest of the women. "Get out here!" Hutch roared, climbing into the wagon. The women huddled back, but there was nowhere to go. Hutch grabbed Beth by the arm and started to drag her toward the door. The girl fought, kicking and scratching. Lila saw the look in his eyes. She knew what he wanted. She knew what correction meant. She moved. The pain in her ribs exploded, making her vision swim. But she did not stop. She pushed herself up and threw her body, all 110 pounds of her, at the guard's legs. She was too weak to knock him down, but she surprised him. He stumbled. Letting go of Beth, he turned, his face purple with rage. "You!" he snarled. Lila tried to scramble back, but he grabbed her by the hair and dragged her out of the wagon, throwing her onto the rocky ground. "This one likes to fight," Hutch yelled to the other guard, who watched from his horse, laughing. "The colonel said she needed softening." He kicked her. The steel toe of his boot connected with her side. right where the ribs were already broken. Lila heard a crack, and the world went white with pain. She gasped, but no air came. She curled into a ball, shaking. "That is enough," Hutch said, breathing hard. He spat on the ground beside her. "Next time, I will not stop." He climbed back onto his horse. Lila lay in the dirt, the world spinning, tasting dust and blood. She heard the wagon door slam shut. She heard Beth, safe inside, sobbing. She had protected her, slowly, painfully. She pushed herself up to her hands and knees. The other guard tied her wrist to the back of the wagon. "You will walk for a while," he said. They started moving. Lila stumbled, forced to jog to keep up, the rope cutting into her wrist. Every step a new fire in her chest. The wild terrain grew colder. The sun was a pale, weak circle in a graying sky. Above them, heavy snow clouds gathered over the dark ridges of the mountains, promising a new kind of hell. The trail was not hard to follow. A heavy wagon, 4 mules, and 3 horses cut a deep wound across the high desert. Elias Granger followed it like a ghost. He rode for 3 days, the world shrinking to the tracks in the dust and the ache in his own body. The land changed. It rose from the flat, cracked plains of the border, and climbed into the sharp, stony foothills. The wind, which had been hot and dry, now carried the bite of ice. The sun was a pale coin in a sky the color of dirty steel. Elias was alone. He had been alone for so long that the silence felt like his only true companion. He was low on food. By the 3rd morning, he was down to a strip of jerky, so hard he had to soak it in his canteen just to chew it. His coffee was gone. He pulled the collar of his winter coat tighter. It was heavy wool, lined with flannel, the stitching thick and uneven. His mother had made it for him 20 years ago, back when he was a different man. Her hands, rough from lye soap and garden dirt, had stitched every seam. It was the only thing he owned that held any warmth that was not his own. He rode old Tom through the sparse pines, his eyes scanning the ridges. Croft was moving fast, pushing the mules hard. He was trying to beat the winter. Elias knew this land. He knew that if the snows came heavy in the high passes, the wagon would be trapped. Croft knew it, too. That meant he was desperate, and a desperate man was a sloppy man. On the 4th day, he found the first sign. He came around a bend in the narrow, rocky trail and saw it. A dead mule lying on its side, its legs stiff. It had been shot, not by an arrow, but by a bullet. It had likely broken a leg in the rocks, and they had put it down rather than waste time. Elias dismounted, his boots crunching on the frosted granite. He looked around. The earth was torn up. He saw the tracks of a heavy wagon wheel that had dug deep, and beside it, pieces of a broken axle spoke. They had been forced to stop, to repair the wagon. He walked further, his rifle in his hand. His eyes caught a flash of color on a gray sage branch. He stopped. He reached out and touched it. It was a scrap of cloth, torn from a dress, blue calico, faded from the sun and stained with dirt. A cold, familiar rage began to build in his chest. It was not the hot rage of a young man, but the deep, slow-burning anger of a man who has seen the same sin committed too many times. He pictured the girl, Lila, her dark, defiant eyes. He pictured the brute, Hutch, dragging her. He pictured the fear. He remembered the raiders who had taken his sister. He remembered the torn piece of her blue pinafore he had found snagged on the splintered door frame. Elias closed his fist around the scrap of cloth. He took a deep, shuddering breath of the cold air. He was no longer just following. He was hunting, miles ahead, inside the rocking darkness of the wagon. Lila had stopped feeling the worst of the pain. Her cracked ribs had settled into a dull, constant fire, a part of her now, like her own heartbeat. She had learned to breathe in small sips, to move with the sway of the wagon instead of fighting it. The darkness was a mercy. It hid the filth and the bruises, but it could not hide the sound of sickness. Beth, the young girl she had protected, was burning with fever. She lay beside Lila, her breath coming in ragged, wet rasps. "Water," Beth whispered. It was the only word she had said for a day. "Please, I am so hot." Lila shifted. The movement sent a jolt through her side, but she ignored it. She felt in the dark for the canteen they were given once a day. It was nearly empty, the water inside stale and warm. She uncapped it and gently lifted Beth's head, cradling the girl's hot skull in her lap. "Just a little," Lila whispered, her own throat parched. "Sip it slow." She let a few drops fall onto the girl's cracked lips. Beth swallowed, her eyes rolling back, unfocused. "It is all right," Lila murmured, brushing the matted hair from the girl's face. "You just rest." Lila leaned her head back against the rough wooden wall of the wagon. Her own head throbbed. After she had taken the kick for Beth, Hutch had tied her to the back of the wagon and made her walk for miles. When she fell, he had dragged her. When they finally stopped for the night, Croft had come over. He had looked at her, his eyes cold and gray. "Stubbornness is a disease, girl," he had said, "and I am the cure." He had struck her across the face with the heavy leather of his riding glove, the blow splitting her scalp open above the temple. Now, sitting in the dark, she touched the dried blood in her hair. She felt no anger, not anymore. The anger had burned out, leaving behind something harder, something cold and patient. She closed her eyes and let the wagon's rocking carry her away. She was not in the wagon. She was on a back porch in East Texas. The air was thick and sweet, smelling of honeysuckle and damp earth. Her mother was beside her, her strong, brown hands snapping beans into a metal bowl, the sound a steady rhythm in the twilight. Her mother was singing. It was an old song, one her own grandmother had taught her. A song about a river, about going home. "Hush now, baby, do not you cry. Gonna see the water rollin' by. Gonna wash this dust right from your feet. Gonna make this bitter life so sweet." Lila had been born free. That is what her mother always told her. You are not a slave, Lila, you were born free. But freedom was just a word. Freedom meant working another man's land for scraps. Freedom meant that when the cotton failed, the landowner, Mr. Jacoby, said they owed him for the seed and the tools in the cabin. And when her mother died from the lung sickness, Jacoby had come with the papers. "You got a debt, girl," he had said, his eyes looking at her in a way that made her skin crawl. "And you are gonna pay it." Freedom, she thought, was just the quiet part before the chains came back. "It is so cold," Beth whispered, pulling Lila from the memory. The girl was shaking now, her teeth chattering, though the air in the wagon was close. "I know, child," Lila said. She pulled the thin, filthy blanket up around the girl's shoulders. She put her arms around Beth, pulling her close, sharing the small warmth of her own body. Even as her broken ribs screamed in protest, she held the sick girl and stared into the absolute darkness. Her mother's song a silent echo in her mind. Elias found his spot 2 days later. The trail wound down into a narrow canyon, the walls rising up 100 feet on either side, the path barely wide enough for the wagon. A shallow, half-frozen creek trickled through the bottom. They would have to stop here to water the mules. Elias left old Tom tied in a thicket of juniper a mile back. He moved down the ridge on foot, his Winchester in hand. He was a good hunter. He knew how to be patient, how to blend with the rock, how to wait. He found a high ledge, screened by a dead pine, that overlooked the creek. He lay flat on the cold stone, his rifle resting on his saddlebag. He waited. The sun was low, casting long, purple shadows. When he heard them, the clatter of hooves on stone, the snap of a whip, and a man's curse. One rider came first, riding ahead to scout the watering hole. Elias's breath caught. It was Hutch, the big man with the stained beard, the one who had kicked Lila. He rode his horse right down to the creek bed and dismounted, letting his horse drink. He unslung his own rifle and leaned it against a rock, then knelt by the water, splashing his face. Elias centered the rifle sight on the man's chest. His finger tightened on the trigger. It was an easy shot, but a shot would echo through the canyon like thunder. Croft and the other guard were just minutes behind. They would be warned. They would take cover, perhaps use the women as shields. Elias let out his breath, easing his finger off the trigger. Not yet. He needed to be silent. He needed to be close. He watched Hutch stand up, stretch, and walk a few yards downstream, looking for a better spot for the mules. He disappeared around a small bend of rock. Elias moved. He slung his rifle over his back, drew the long hunting knife from the sheath on his belt, and slipped off the ledge. He moved like a shadow, his worn boots making no sound on the sandy soil. He kept the rock formation between him and the wagon train. Hutch was kneeling again, testing the depth of the water with his hand. He was humming, relaxed. Elias stepped out from behind the rock. Hutch heard him, or sensed him, at the last second. He started to turn, his hand flying to the pistol on his hip. He was not fast enough. Elias drove forward, his left hand grabbing the man's beard and jerking his head back, his right hand bringing the knife up and under the ribs, deep and hard, straight into the heart. Hutch's eyes went wide. A strangled, wet sound gurgled in his throat. He looked at Elias, his expression one of pure, animal surprise. Elias held him, supporting his weight, looking him dead in the eye as the life drained out of him. He felt the man's body go limp. He gently, quietly, lowered the heavy corpse onto the creek bank, the water turning dark around it. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel remorse. He felt nothing at all. It was just a thing that had to be done. He pulled his knife free, wiped it on the dead man's shirt, and sheathed it. He worked quickly. He took Hutch's heavy coat, which was newer and warmer than his own. He took the pistol, the full cartridge belt, and the rifle. He dragged the body into a thicket of willows, covering it with dead branches. He looked at the man's horse. It was a good-looking bay, stronger than old Tom. He took its reins, mounted his own horse, and led the new one back up the ridge, disappearing into the pines just as the main wagon groaned into view down below. Night fell hard. The temperature plummeted. Elias made a cold camp 2 miles away, eating the last of his jerky. He waited until the moon was high and the world was bathed in a pale, frozen light. He left the horses and moved back toward the canyon, this time from the other side. He climbed the high ridge, the one overlooking the slavers' camp. He moved on his belly the last 100 yards, crawling through snow patches and sharp rock until he could see the fire. They had circled the wagon. The mules were tied to its wheels. The fire was small, built in a ring of stones. Silas Croft was sitting on a log, drinking from a tin cup. The third guard, a lean man Elias did not recognize, was cleaning his rifle. Then he saw her. Lila was not in the wagon. She was tied to a spare wagon wheel that leaned against a boulder, away from the warmth of the fire. Her hands were bound to the spokes, forcing her to sit upright on the frozen ground. Her head was bleeding again, a dark crust of blood matting her hair and running down her cheek. She was shivering, her body trembling violently in the cold. Elias's hand tightened on his rifle stock. He saw Croft look over at her. "You ready to learn some humility, girl?" Croft called out. Lila did not answer. She just stared into the darkness, past the fire, her body rigid. "Maybe another night in the cold will break that spirit," Croft said, turning back to the fire. Elias raised his rifle. He had a clear shot. He could take Croft right now. The other guard was looking down, busy with his gun. He could kill Croft, then the other man, before he even knew what happened. He sighted down the barrel. His finger found the trigger. And then, a figure moved from the far side of the wagon. It was a boy. He could not have been more than 10 years old. He was small and thin, wearing a man's oversized coat. He walked to the fire, carrying a pot. He looked like a camp helper, maybe the cook's boy they had picked up somewhere. The boy set the pot near the flames and looked over at Lila, his face pale and frightened. Elias froze. His mind flashed back. The burning farmhouse in Tennessee, the faces of the children, wide with terror, just before Croft's men. He could not shoot. He would not risk the boy. He would not become the thing he was hunting. He lowered the rifle, a bitter, acidic taste in his mouth. He watched for another hour. He watched the new guard check on the sick girl, Beth, then shake his head at Croft. He watched the boy huddle by the fire, trying to sleep. He watched Lila, tied to the wheel, shiver until her whole body seemed to be convulsing, but she never made a sound. Elias eased backward, sliding over the rock and snow, leaving no trace. He retreated into the trees. His chance was gone. He would have to wait. He would attack at dawn. He would hit them when the light was gray, when the cold was at its deepest, when the boy was likely still wrapped in his blankets inside the wagon. He would come down from the high ground, fast and hard. He went back to his horses and waited, sitting with his back to a pine, his rifle across his lap. He did not sleep. He just watched the stars, his anger now a cold, sharp blade inside him. In the camp, Lila stared up at the ridge. She had stopped shivering. A strange, dangerous numbness was creeping up her legs and arms. She knew what it meant. She knew a person could freeze to death, even sitting up. She tried to think of her mother. She tried to hum the song. "Hush now, baby. Do not you cry." Her lips were too stiff to move. Her throat was closed. She looked up at the dark line of the ridge, high above her. The moon was bright, and for just a second, she saw it. A glint, the brief, sharp flash of moonlight hitting steel. It could have been a star. It could have been ice. Or it could have been a rifle barrel. She did not feel fear. She felt a strange, quiet acceptance. Perhaps it was a wolf hunter. Perhaps it was an Indian. Perhaps it was just death, finally come to cut her chains. She closed her eyes. Frost began to gather on her eyelashes, white and delicate as a spider's web. She let the cold take her, and she waited for the morning. The world was balanced on the edge of a knife. The color of the sky was not black, but a deep, bruised purple that meant dawn was coming, and the cold with it. This was the false dawn, the hour when the earth gives up its last warmth and the air freezes in the lungs. Elias Granger lay on the stone ridge, his body numb. He had been there for 4 hours, unmoving. He was part of the rock, part of the ice. He watched the camp below. The fire had burned down to a pile of glowing red eyes in the dark. He saw movement. A man, the lean one called Miller, stumbled out from under the wagon. He kicked the fire, sending up a shower of sparks, and cursed the cold. He walked to the edge of camp, turning his back. Elias chambered around. The metallic schlick-schlack of the Winchester was deafening in the silence. But down below, the wind and the creek covered the sound. He needed to see Croft. He needed to see the boy. Another man, the wagon driver, emerged, pulling on his boots. He glanced up at the sky. Then, from a canvas tent Elias had not seen in the dark, Silas Croft appeared. He was already dressed, his gray coat buttoned, his hat on. He held a tin cup. Elias breathed out, a plume of white fog. 3 men. He scanned for the boy. Pip. He saw a small movement inside the open back of the wagon. The boy was in there, likely sleeping near the women for warmth. He was safe from the first shots. Elias settled the rifle stock against his shoulder. The wool of his mother's coat was rough against his cheek. He lined up the sights, not on Croft, on the men who could shoot back. He aimed at Miller, who was now stretching, his rifle leaning against the wagon wheel. Elias squeezed the trigger. The shot was an explosion that shattered the morning. The boom echoed off the canyon walls, sounding like a dozen rifles. before the echo even faded. Elias saw Miller grab his chest, a look of simple surprise on his face, and fall backward into the dirt. The driver spun, his mouth open, reaching for the pistol on his hip. Elias worked the lever, ejecting the hot brass. Chambering the new round, he aimed, he fired. The second shot threw the driver against the wagon, and he slid down, leaving a dark smear on the canvas. Chaos. Croft dove behind the wagon, his cup flying, drawing his own pistol. "Ambush!" he roared. "To the rocks!" Elias sighted on the spot where Croft had vanished. He waited. Down below, Lila had been jolted from a frozen, shallow sleep. She was still tied to the heavy wooden stool, a punishment for her defiance. The ropes bit deep into her wrists, which were numb and raw. The gunshots were so loud, they felt like they were inside her head. She heard the men scream. She heard the bullets. One of them, the second shot, punched through the wagon box right above her head with a sound like a giant fist. Inside the wagon, the other two women, Mary and the sick girl Beth, were screaming. Pip, the boy, was crying. "He is killing us!" Mary shrieked. Lila looked at the wagon. She saw the fresh hole in the canvas. She saw where the driver had fallen. More shots were coming from the ridge. A bullet struck the iron rim of the wagon wheel, whining as it spun off into the dark. The man on the ridge was firing at the wagon. Lila was tied. Her legs were frozen. Her ribs were a cage of fire, but the girls were in the wagon. The boy was in there. She did not think. She acted. She pushed with her frozen legs, trying to stand. The stool, tied to her back and arms, came with her. It was heavy, made of solid oak. She grunted, the sound torn from her throat. She got her feet under her and shoved, dragging the stool with her. She was trying to move her body, and the stool with it, in front of the open back of the wagon, to shield them. "Get back!" she screamed at the hole. "Get away from the wall!" From behind the wagon, Croft leaned out and fired his pistol up at the ridge. The muzzle flashed yellow. The bullet went high. Elias saw the flash. He fired at it. His bullet tore a chunk of wood from the wagon tongue. Croft ducked back. He saw Lila, struggling, dragging the stool. "Get down, you fool!" he shouted. Lila ignored him. She took another step. Elias saw her, too. He saw what she was doing, a woman, barely alive, trying to shield the others with her own body. Another shot came from Croft. This one was wild, aimed badly. The bullet screamed past Lila's head and struck the boulder behind her. But a piece of the bullet, or a chip of stone, flew off. Lila felt a sudden, sharp, burning line of fire race across her thigh. She looked down. Blood, dark in the gray light, was soaking through her ragged dress. She screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of rage. The pain was absolute, waking her from the cold numbness. She fell to her knees, but she did not stop. She crawled, dragging the stool, dragging her wounded leg, trying to cover that opening. On the ridge, Elias saw her fall. He saw her get up. He forgot about the plan. He forgot about cover. He forgot everything but the girl. He stood up, his Winchester in his hand, and he charged. He ran, sliding down the steep incline of scree and snow, half falling, half sprinting. He was exposed, a perfect target, but he did not care. Croft heard the sound of the sliding rock. He stepped out from behind the wagon, his pistol raised, a look of triumph on his face. He had flushed the attacker. "Fool," Croft sneered, and leveled his gun. Elias was still moving, his feet churning in the loose rock. He did not stop to aim. He brought the rifle up, held it level with his hip, and fired. He was 20 yards away. The .44 caliber slug hit Silas Croft square in the chest. The force of the impact lifted the man off his feet. Croft's pistol discharged into the dirt. He looked down at his own chest, at the spreading stain, then up at Elias. His eyes were wide. He did not look evil. He just looked surprised. Then he fell and did not move. The canyon was suddenly terribly silent. The only sounds were the wind whistling through the pines, the whimpering of the boy in the wagon, and the harsh, ragged breathing of Elias Granger. He stood over Croft's body for a single second. He looked at the man who had haunted his dreams for 10 years. He felt nothing. The ghost did not leave. He turned and ran to Lila. She was slumped against the wagon wheel, the stool still tied to her. Her head was down. Her blood was melting a small patch of snow. He knelt beside her. He pulled his knife and cut the ropes on her wrists. The skin beneath was raw and purple. "You'll be all right," he said. His voice was a harsh croak. Lila raised her head. Her vision was swimming. All she saw was a shape. A big man, smelling of gunpowder, leather, and the cold morning. He was just another shadow, another captor. She tried to lift her hands, to fight him, but she had nothing left. She saw the steel of his knife, and she closed her eyes, waiting for the killing cut. Instead, she felt his arms. One arm slid under her knees, the other around her back. He lifted her. She was as light as a bundle of sticks. "You'll be all right," he said again, a promise to himself. Lila sagged against his chest, her consciousness fading. The last thing she felt was the rough wool of his coat against her cheek. Then the world went black. Elias held her for a moment, his heart hammering. He looked around. 3 bodies, a wagon full of terror. He had to get them out. The gunshots would carry for miles. Anyone, bandits, trackers, or worse, could be on their way. "Son," he yelled at the wagon, "come out! I am not going to hurt you." Pip, the boy, peeked out, his face streaked with tears. He saw Elias, a stranger, holding Lila. He saw the dead men. "You killed them," the boy whispered. "They were bad men," Elias said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Get your coat. We are leaving." He went to the back of the wagon. Mary, the other woman, was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide and vacant. Beth, the sick girl, was breathing in shallow, wet gasps, her skin gray. "We have to go," Elias said. "Now." He helped Mary out. She was numb, moving like a sleepwalker. "Go up that ridge," he pointed. "To the trees. Find a bay horse and a gray. Wait there." She nodded dumbly and began to walk. "Son," Elias said to Pip, "help her. Make sure she finds them." The boy, given a job, nodded and ran after the woman. Elias gently laid Lila on a blanket he pulled from the wagon. He turned back to Beth. He lifted her. She was burning with fever, her body limp. He carried her up the rocky slope, his legs burning. He found the place he had scouted earlier, a shallow cave hidden behind a thicket of dead mountain mahogany. He laid Beth inside, on the dry, dusty floor. He ran back down. It had begun to snow, not a gentle drift, but hard, stinging pellets. The storm was here. He grabbed Lila. He carried her up the slope. The world was turning white. By the time he laid her down next to Beth, the tracks he had made were already disappearing. He made one last trip. He grabbed blankets, the rest of his jerky from his saddlebag, and a sack of coffee and flour from the wagon. He took Croft's waterskin. He pulled his axe from his saddle. He did not look at the bodies again. He turned his back on the camp and climbed to the cave. The snow was coming down in a thick, suffocating sheet, sealing them in. He found the boy, Pip, and the woman, Mary, huddled just inside the cave mouth. "Good," he grunted. He brought the horses into a small overhang nearby, just enough to keep the worst of the snow off them. He went into the cave. It was not deep, just a hollow in the rock, but it was dry. He built a small fire, just inside the entrance, using dry wood from the pack. The smoke curled up and was lost in the swirling snow. He turned to the women. Lila was unconscious. Beth was worse. Her breathing was a terrible, rattling sound. He sat with her. He put his canteen to her lips, but she could not drink. He wiped her face with a scrap of blanket. There was nothing he could do. She died just after nightfall. She just stopped breathing. Elias closed her eyes. Mary began to cry. A low, keening wail. Pip crawled into the corner. Elias carried the girl's small body to the back of the cave and covered her with a blanket. He had come to save them, and he had been too late. The weight of it settled on him, colder than the storm. He turned his attention to Lila. He had to see to her leg. He built up the fire. In the flickering light, he looked at her. She was so thin, her face bruised and hollowed by starvation, but she was breathing. He took his knife and, his hands hesitating, he carefully cut away the ragged cloth of her dress from her thigh. The wound was ugly, a long, deep gash where the metal or stone had torn the flesh. It was bleeding sluggishly, the edges already purple and swollen. It was full of dirt and threads. He found Croft's flask of whiskey in his coat pocket. He poured some on a strip of clean cloth he tore from a blanket. He hesitated. His hands, which had been steady when he killed 3 men, were trembling. He had not touched another living person with any kind of care in more than a decade. He set his jaw and began to clean the wound. Lila came back to consciousness with a gasp. The first thing she felt was the sharp, biting sting of the whiskey in her leg. The second thing she felt was a man's hand on her thigh. Her eyes flew open. She saw a strange man, his face dark with stubble, lit by the fire. He was kneeling over her. His hands were on her. She did not scream. She roared. It was a raw, animal sound of pure terror. She was trapped again. This was the new master. He had killed the others to have her for himself. "No!" she shrieked, and she hit him. She clawed at his face, her weak hands turning into talons. She scrambled backward, dragging her wounded leg, crab-walking away from him until her back hit the cold rock wall of the cave. "Get away from me!" she spat, her eyes wild, searching for a weapon, for anything. "Do not touch me!" Elias recoiled, holding his hands up. He had a bloody scratch on his cheek. He was stunned. He had saved her, and she looked at him like he was a monster. He realized, in that moment, that to her he was just the next man in a long line of men who would hurt her. He did not explain. He did not say, "I saved you." He did not say, "I am not like them." The words were meaningless. He stood up slowly, backing away. He went to his saddlebag and pulled out the heavy wool coat his mother had made. He walked toward her slowly. She flinched, pulling her legs up. He did not get close. He tossed the coat. It landed on her, covering her. "It is cold," he said, his voice flat. Then he retreated to the mouth of the cave. He sat with his back to her, facing the storm, giving her the safety of the fire and the small distance. He left her alone, to face the terror he had caused. For 3 days, the storm was king. It was a solid wall of white, screaming past the cave mouth. They were trapped. A strange, quiet life formed in that small, smoky space. Elias would leave in the gray light, disappearing into the blizzard. He would come back hours later, covered in ice, with a rabbit or 2. He would skin them and stew them in the small pot, adding a little flour to make a thin gravy. He gave the first portions to Pip and Mary, the boy. Pip had quickly attached himself to Elias. He followed him like a shadow, watching him with wide, admiring eyes. Mary, too, had come out of her shock. She saw Elias as a savior, a righteous man who had delivered them. She mended his shirt where it had torn. Lila did not speak. She sat in the back of the cave, wrapped in his heavy coat, her eyes following his every move. She watched him. She saw him clean his rifle. She saw him gently show Pip how to set a snare. She saw him hand the tin plate of food to Mary, his head bowed, respectful. This was not the man she expected. He was quiet. He was gentle. He never looked at her in the way Croft had. Or Hutch. He never looked at her at all, unless it was to offer her a plate of food, which he would set on the ground between them and back away. She was healing. The wound was clean. The fever had passed. The rest had brought some strength back to her, but her mind was a tangle. He had killed for her. He had tended her, and he asked for nothing. On the third night, the storm was finally easing. The silence in the cave was thick. Lila's throat was dry, her voice rough from disuse. Why? The word was small, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. Elias, who was sharpening his knife on a whetstone, did not stop. He kept at the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone. Pip and Mary were asleep. Lila cleared her throat. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice stronger. Elias stopped. He looked at the blade in his hands. He did not turn to look at her. He stared at the fire, at the memory of other fires. He saw a farmhouse in Tennessee. He saw his sister's face. He had no answer for her that would make sense. Because he was haunted? Because he was a coward who had finally found a moment to be brave? 10 years too late? Because her eyes were like his sister's? He shook his head, still facing the fire. "I do not know," he said at last. It was the truth. Lila watched his back. It was not the answer she wanted, but it was an honest one. Later that night, the cave was dark, the fire just embers. The wind had died. Elias was asleep, his head on his saddle, his breathing heavy. But he was not resting. He twitched. He mumbled. "No," he whispered, his voice tight. "Do not stop it." He was back in Tennessee. He was watching the farmhouse burn. He could smell the smoke, hear the screams. He saw Croft, lighting his cigar. "Sarah!" he cried out, the name torn from his sleep. He sat bolt upright, his eyes wide and blind with terror, his hand grabbing for the pistol that was not there. He was gasping, covered in a cold sweat. The nightmare had him. Pip cried out in his sleep. Mary stirred. Lila was awake. She had been watching him. She had seen nightmares like that before. She had lived them. She saw him, not as a killer, not as a savior, but as a man trapped in his own kind of cave. She moved. She slid across the dirt floor, her wounded leg dragging slightly. She sat down beside him. He flinched, his body rigid, still seeing the ghosts. She did not say anything. She did not try to comfort him with words. Silently, she reached out and rested her hand on his arm. Elias froze. He looked down at her small, dark hand on the sleeve of his shirt. He felt the warmth of her touch, a simple, human pressure. It was an anchor. He slowly turned his head and looked at her. Her face was calm, her dark eyes clear in the faint red glow of the embers. She was not afraid of him. He let out the breath he had been holding. The ghosts receded. The burning farmhouse faded. He was in a cave, in the snow, and he was not alone. He did not speak. She did not move her hand. They sat together in the darkness, two survivors, listening to the silence. The blizzard broke on the fourth morning. It left the world scoured clean, silent and buried under a white blanket that seemed to stretch to the end of time. The sky was a pale, aching blue, and the air was so cold it stung the lungs. Inside the cave, the truce held. Elias looked at the three survivors huddled by the fire. Mary, the older woman, her eyes still holding a distant shock. Pip, the boy, who now shadowed Elias's every move. And Lila, she was quiet, her leg healing, her eyes watchful. She had given him back his coat, and now sat wrapped in a heavy blanket from the wagon. He had to get them to safety. The cave was a tomb. The body of Beth, the young girl, lay in the back, covered in stones. They could not stay. "We leave in an hour," Elias said, his voice flat. He kicked the snow away from the cave mouth. "We are 2 days' ride from a mission. The Sisters of Mercy. They will take you in." Mary wept with relief. Pip looked at Elias, his expression torn. The journey was slow, the snow was deep, and the horses struggled. Elias put Mary and Pip on his own horse, old Tom, who was steady and strong. He gave the bay, Hutch's horse, to Lila. She rode awkwardly, her wounded legs stiff, her hands clenched on the reins, but she did not complain. Elias walked, his rifle in hand, breaking the trail. He did not speak, he just watched the ridges, his face a hard mask, expecting trouble. They reached the mission on the third day. It was a small, humble place of adobe and wood. A thin wisp of smoke rising from its chimney. A simple wooden cross nailed above the door. It looked like the only building for 100 miles. A woman in a black habit, her face weathered and kind, opened the door. She was the Mother Superior.
"Lord have mercy,"
she whispered, seeing the battered group.
Bring them in, bring them in."
Elias stayed outside. He helped Mary and Pip down from the horse. Mary stumbled into the warm chapel. Pip stopped. He looked up at Elias.
"Are you coming, mister?"
Elias shook his head. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder.
"This is your place now. You will be safe."
He pressed a few coins into the boy's hand. "Be good." Pip's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded and ran inside. Lila was still on her horse. She had watched the exchange, her face unreadable. "You too," Elias said, not looking at her. "They will care for you. They will tend that leg." Lila did not move. Another nun, older, with sharp, intelligent eyes, came out. She squinted at Lila.
"Child,"
she said, her voice rough.
"you favor someone I once knew. You have her eyes."
Lila looked down at her.
"I am from Texas, sister." "I knew it,"
the nun said, stepping closer.
"From near Seguin. You are Araminta's girl."
Lila's breath hitched. She had not heard her mother's name spoken aloud in 2 years.
"You knew her?"
"I taught her to read, long ago." The nun, Sister Angeline, said, her face softened. "She was a bright, strong woman. I was heartbroken when I heard—" She stopped. "She spoke of you and your brother, Jacob." Lila's hands tightened on the reins.
"My brother,"
she whispered.
Did you hear?"
"He fled north," the sister said, lowering her voice. "After the trouble with Mr. Jacoby, it was said he was trying to get to the new territories. A freight driver, passing through last year, mentioned a young man of his description, working on a silver line near Leadville, in Colorado."
"Colorado." The word was a rock dropping into a deep, still pool. A place, a name, a brother. Hope.
Elias had been listening. He looked at Lila. Her whole body was rigid. He nodded toward the mission door. "Go on, Lila. You are safe now." He turned to mount Old Tom, to ride away, to disappear back into the wilderness. "No." The word was quiet, but it stopped him cold. He turned back. Lila was dismounting, her movements stiff. She winced as her bad leg took her weight, but she stood straight. "What did you say?" Elias asked. "I said no," she repeated, her voice stronger. She looked from the warm mission door to the cold, empty horizon, and then to him. "I thank you, sister, for your kindness, but I am not staying." Sister Angeline looked shocked. "But child, you are wounded. You are alone. This is a sanctuary."
"It is a cage,"
Lila said. The words were not mean, just true. "It is a kind cage, and a warm one. But it is still a cage. I will not be locked up again, not by slavers, and not by kindness." She limped over to Elias. She looked up at him, her dark eyes holding that same fire he had seen in the alley. "You are heading north," she stated. It was not a question. "Colorado is north." Elias felt a cold knot of dread. "Lila, you do not know what you are asking. The men I killed, they were not alone. Their organization is rich. They will have trackers out. I am a wanted man. Riding with me is a death sentence."
"I am not safe anywhere,"
Lila countered, her voice low and fierce. "Here, I am a sitting duck. If they track you here, I am just a thing for them to take." With you, at least I am moving. At least I have a chance. She looked at his rifle, then back at his face. You saved me from those men. Do not leave me here to be found by the next ones. I am asking you. He looked at her for a long, hard minute. He saw the woman who had dragged a stool to shield children while bullets were flying. He saw the woman who had sat with him in the dark after his nightmare. He knew, with a certainty that settled heavy in his gut, that she was right. She was a fighter, and caging her would be the end of her. He let out a long breath, his fog mixing with the cold air. "All right," he said, his voice rough, "but it will be hard. Harder than anything you have known." Lila nodded, a small, grim motion. "I am hard," she said. "I have had to be." He turned to Sister Angeline. "Do you have a dress, something for riding, and boots?" The sister, seeing the set of Lila's jaw, just nodded and went inside. They rode out an hour later, two small figures heading north into the vast, white emptiness. Lila was dressed in a boy's discarded trousers, a thick wool shirt, and a man's coat. She looked small, but not broken. The next weeks were the hardest of their lives. The high country was a frozen hell, but Elias had given his word. If she was to ride with him, she would not be baggage. She would be a partner. She would survive. He was a harsh teacher, because the world was a harsh master. "You are holding the reins like you are strangling a snake," he said one afternoon, his voice sharp. "The horse feels your fear. Let him do the work. Your legs, not your hands." She practiced, her thighs burning, her hands raw, until she could ride the bay like she was born to it. Then came the guns. He gave her the heavy pistol he had taken from Hutch. "It is too heavy," she complained, her arms shaking. "It is what you have," he said. "It will stop a man. That is all that matters." He set a tin can on a log 30 feet away. Her first shot was wild, the sound deafening, the recoil knocking her off balance. "You are closing your eyes," he said, patient. "You are pulling the trigger, jerking it. Do not pull. Squeeze. Squeeze it slow, like you are crushing a berry. Breathe out." She tried again and again. She spent hours, her arms aching, her ears ringing, until she could hit the can, 3 times out of 5. "Now the rifle," he said. He taught her how to survive, how to build a fire with damp wood and a single match, how to read the tracks of a rabbit, and how to set a snare, how to bank a fire so it would smolder all night, how to sleep with one ear open, and how to wake up instantly, without moving. Lila absorbed it all. She was a dry sponge, desperate for the knowledge. She never cried. She never complained. She would fall, her wounded leg giving way, and she would just get back up, her mouth set in a hard line. Elias watched her. He saw the bruises, the exhaustion, but he also saw the woman she was becoming, the steel in her spine. They found the town of Coyote Jaw a month later. It was not on their map. It was a place that had died, a small, ruined mining camp, its buildings leaning like drunks, their windows like empty eye sockets. The wind whistled through the gaps in the boards. "We need supplies," Lila said, her voice practical. They were down to their last handful of flour, and the hunting had been poor. There might be a general store, something left behind. Elias pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the one muddy street. "I do not like this," he whispered. "It feels wrong." "We need salt." "Elias," she said, "we cannot go on without it." He nodded, his hand resting on his rifle. "All right, but be ready. We ride through first. See what is what." They rode slowly down the street. It was dead. An overturned wagon, a saloon with its doors hanging off one hinge. They reached the end of the street, a ruined mercantile on the left. "See?" Lila said. "Nothing." "Wait," Elias said. His eyes were fixed on the saloon. "The mud on the boardwalk." Lila looked. Fresh boot prints. A voice, oily and pleased, echoed from the saloon's upper window. Well, well, look what we got here. The cowboy who cost us a shipment. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. One from the saloon, one from the livery, one from the mercantile. They were not soldiers. They were bounty men, their faces hard and greasy, their eyes dead. The reward is for the man. The leader said, a thick-bodied man with a stained duster. But the girl, she will fetch a fine price back in New Me. He never finished the word. Lila, ride! Elias roared. He was not waiting. He shoved her horse, hard, and his Winchester was already at his shoulder. The street erupted in a crash of gunfire. Elias fired, his shot taking the man from the livery in the throat. The man crumpled. A second man, lean and fast, fired from the mercantile porch. The bullet punched through the air where Elias's head had been, and Elias felt a searing, hot punch in his left side, just above the hip, clean through the muscle. He grunted, the pain staggering him. But he stayed upright. He fired back, but the man had ducked behind an overturned ore cart. Lila's horse reared, screaming. She was thrown, landing hard on the ground, the pistol Elias had given her jolting from its holster. Her bad leg twisted under her. The leader, the man in the duster, saw her. He grinned, showing yellow teeth. He ignored Elias, who was trapped by the second man's gunfire. He started walking toward Lila, pulling his own pistol. Come here, girl, he sneered. Your traveling days are over. Lila scrambled, her hands in the mud, grabbing for the pistol. She got her fingers around the grip. I said, come here, the man roared, raising his gun. He was 10 yards away. Lila pushed herself up onto her knees. She raised the heavy pistol with both hands. Her arms were shaking so violently, she could barely aim. She saw his chest. She saw the dirty buttons on his duster. Squeeze, do not pull, breathe out. She shut one eye. She centered the sight. She squeezed. The gun bucked, the sound slamming her eardrums. The man in the duster stopped. He looked down, confused, at the dark, growing stain in the center of his chest. He looked up at Lila, his mouth open. He took one step, then fell face first into the mud. The man behind the ore cart saw his boss fall. He panicked. He stood up, turning to run. Elias's rifle cracked. The fight was over. The silence that fell was worse than the noise. It was heavy, broken only by the whistling wind. Lila was still on her knees, the heavy pistol smoking in her trembling hands. She was shaking all over, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that started in her gut and would not stop. She had killed a man. Elias stumbled over to her. He was breathing hard. Lila, you all right? She just nodded, unable to speak, her eyes fixed on the body in the mud. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight. Get up, he said, his voice rough. Get up! We have to go! Now! He pulled her to her feet. He swayed, a wave of dizziness hitting him. He grunted, putting his hand to his side. It came away slick and dark with blood. Lila's eyes widened. Elias, you are hit. It is nothing, he lied, his face pale. Get the horse! They rode for hours. They rode out of the ruined town, up into the rocky high country, pushing the horses as hard as they could. Elias was slumping, holding the saddle horn with both hands. The world was starting to blur. The snow began to fall again, a light, freezing mist. He was barely conscious when Lila saw it. A line shack, a tiny, broken-down cabin half hidden in a stand of pines, smoke rising from a rusty stovepipe. It was not abandoned. Elias, Lila said, shaking him. Hold on. He slid from the saddle, his legs giving out, and collapsed into the snow. Lila pounded on the door. It opened, revealing a stunned, ancient-looking sheepherder. Lila did not ask for help. She offered him their last $20. My husband, she said, is hurt. We need shelter. The old man, seeing the money and the blood, nodded. Lila dragged Elias inside. The cabin was one room, filthy,
smelling of sheep and old smoke. There was a bunk, a stove, and a table. Elias collapsed onto the dirt floor. He was shivering, his skin burning. "Cold," he muttered. "So cold." The fever was taking him. Lila took charge. She gave the old man more money. "Go to the town," she said, naming the settlement they had passed a day back. "Get a doctor." The old man, pocketing the cash, nodded and left, taking his mule. Lila knew he might not come back. She was alone. She looked at Elias. He was bleeding, and he was dying. "No," she whispered. "You do not get to die." She got water melting on the stove. She found the old man's jug of cheap corn liquor. She barred the door. She knelt beside Elias. He was muttering, lost in the fever, calling for Sarah. She took his knife. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. She cut his bloody shirt away from the wound. It was worse than she thought. It was a deep, ragged hole, and the edges were blue. The bullet was still in there. She looked at the fire. She looked at the knife. "Forgive me, Elias," she whispered. She heated the blade of the knife in the stove until it glowed orange. She poured liquor over her hands, washing them. She poured it over the wound. Elias screamed, a raw, inhuman sound, and thrashed, his eyes flying open. "Hold still," she commanded, pushing him down with all her weight. He passed out from the pain. She set her jaw. She took the hot knife, and she cut. She dug into the torn muscle, her stomach churning, tears of sickness running down her face. She felt the hot metal hit the lead. She worked the blade, prying it out. The bullet, bloody and deformed, dropped onto the floor. She threw the knife down. She was sobbing, but she did not stop. She found his sewing kit. She poured more liquor on the needle and thread, and she began to stitch the wound closed, her small, dark hands pulling the skin together, her stitching rough but tight. When she was done, he was lying on the floor, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. She could not lift him. She dragged the old man's filthy mattress from the bunk and put it next to him, rolling him onto it. He burned for 2 days. Lila did not sleep. She bathed him. She tore strips from her own shirt, dipping them in the snowmelt, wiping the sweat from his face, his neck, his chest. His body was a history of violence. She saw the old, puckered scars of bullets. She saw knife wounds, and on his back, she saw them, the faint, white, crisscrossed lines of a whip. Scars she knew well. Scars from a time before the war, or perhaps from the war itself. She traced them with her finger, her heart aching with a pain that was not her own. She fed the fire. She sat, the pistol in her lap, and she watched the door, and she listened to him breathe. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Elias opened his eyes. He was weak, his body a single throbbing mass of pain, but his mind was clear. He saw the rough beams of the ceiling. He smelled smoke. He tried to sit up. A bolt of fire shot through his side, and he gasped. "Do not move." Lila was there. She was holding a tin cup of thin broth. Her face was pale and smudged with soot, and her eyes were dark with exhaustion. But she was alive. "Lila," he whispered. His throat was cracked. "You have been out for 2 days," she said, her voice low. She held the cup to his lips. "The doctor never came. I took the bullet out." He drank, the warm liquid a shock. He looked at her, at the authority in her face. He looked at the neatly stitched, if raw, wound in his side. He lay back, weak as a newborn. He looked at her, really saw her, the woman who had killed a man to save him, and then dug into his flesh to save him again. The silence in the cabin was thick, broken only by the wind. He felt a sudden, crushing shame. He had dragged her into this. He had made her a killer. His hand, shaking, moved across the blanket. His fingers brushed the back of hers. "You don't owe me nothing," he rasped. "Not for any of this." Lila looked at their hands. His large and pale against the dark blanket. Hers, small and scarred, steady. She turned her hand over, slowly, and her fingers laced with his.
I do,
she whispered, her voice thick.
I owe you everything.
He tried to shake his head. No, I got you shot at. You believed I was worth something, she said, cutting him off. Her eyes, clear and fierce, met his. You did not know me. I was just a chained girl in the dirt, but you came back. You fought for me. You believed I was worth saving. The air in the room was so tight, he could barely breathe. He saw the tears shining in her eyes, tears she would not let fall. He squeezed her hand. She leaned closer. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of shared pain. It was slow, and it was desperate. It tasted of smoke and blood, and the awful, aching loneliness they both carried. It was a promise that they were no longer alone. He was the one who pulled away. He looked at her face, so close to his, and the shame flooded him. He was a broken man, twice her age, a killer, scarred inside and out. "Lila," he started, his voice thick with self-hatred. "I am sorry, She saw the shame in his eyes. She saw him building a wall. She put her fingers to his lips, silencing him. Then she pressed her forehead to his. Her skin was cool. "You are the only man," she whispered, her breath warming his face, "who never touched me like he owned me." The words hit him like a physical blow. They broke something inside him that had been frozen for 20 years. He closed his eyes. That night, the old man did not return. The cabin was bitter cold. Elias was weak, the pain a living thing. Lila did not go to the floor. She did not ask. She just pulled back the heavy blankets on the mattress. She slid in beside him, on top of the covers, her small body a line of warmth in the icy room. He turned toward her, hissing as the stitches pulled. She moved closer, pressing her body against his back, wrapping an arm around his waist, holding him. He let out a long, shuddering breath and sank into her warmth. They did not make love. They did not speak. They just lay there, tangled together, skin to skin under the blankets. Two broken souls, holding each other against the dark. They fell asleep to the sound of each other's breath. They stayed in the dead man's cabin for another week, a small island of quiet in a sea of snow. Elias healed. The fire in his side slowly cooled to a dull, constant ache. He watched Lila. She had changed. The woman who had been dragged, chained, into a wagon, was gone. In her place was a woman who moved with a quiet, dangerous purpose. She cleaned the pistol every night. She never let the fire go out. The old sheep herder did not return. They knew he had either taken their money and run, or he had met trouble on the road. It did not matter. Their food was gone. "I will go," Lila said. They were down to their last handful of flour. "You are not strong enough to ride yet. I can make it to that settlement we passed. I can get salt and flour. I will be back by dark." Elias did not like it. "It is too dangerous, Lila. After Coyote Jaw. It is more dangerous to stay here and starve," she said, her voice flat. She was already pulling on the man's coat, checking the loads in the pistol. "I will be careful. I will keep my head down. They are not looking for me. They are looking for you." He wanted to argue, but he saw the resolve in her eyes, and he knew she was right. He was still weak. A ride in the cold would tear his stitches. He nodded, his jaw tight. "Take the bay. He is faster. And Lila," he said, his voice rough. "Do not stop for anyone. You hear me? No one." She nodded, touched his good shoulder, and was gone. The settlement was just a cluster of false front buildings, a general store, a saloon, and a smithy. Lila tied the bay in an alley, took a deep breath, and walked into the store. Her hat pulled low. The store was warm, smelling of coffee, tobacco, and dried apples. 2 men were at the counter, talking to the proprietor. "Came through here yesterday." One of the men, a trapper in greasy buckskins, was saying, "A U.S. Marshal, hard man, name of Harmon." The proprietor nodded, weighing out beans. "Heard he is hunting that killer, Granger, the one who shot up Silas Croft and his men." Lila froze. She kept her back to them, pretending to inspect a bolt of cloth. "That ain't the half of it," the trapper said, spitting into a sawdust box. "There is a bounty out for Granger, $500, dead or alive. But the marshal, he is after something else. He says Granger did not just kill those men, he stole the property." "Property?" the proprietor asked. "A girl, a runaway. Says Granger abducted her. The posters are up in the marshal's office." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. She was not a person. She was property. She was the reason a U.S. Marshal was hunting them. They had painted Elias as the villain, and her as the thing he had stolen. She grabbed a small sack of flour and a block of salt, her hands shaking. She walked to the counter, keeping her face down. "That will be $1. "Ma'am," the proprietor said, barely looking at her. She paid with the last of the money from Coyote Jaw and turned to leave. Her heart was a cold, hard knot in her chest. She walked fast, back toward the alley. She just wanted the horse. She just wanted Elias. "Hey, you!" A voice, it came from the mouth of the alley. A man stepped out, blocking her path. He was not a trapper. He was just a town drifter. His eyes mean, his clothes rank. "I seen you," he said, his eyes narrow, looking her up and down. "You fit the description. The marshal's girl." Lila tried to step around him. "I do not know what you are talking about." He grabbed her arm. His grip was like a steel trap. "Do not lie to me. You are her. There is a reward for you, just for bringing you in. You are gonna come with me." He started to drag her. He was strong. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her. She saw his wagon, waiting in the alley. It was happening again. "No!" she screamed, and she dropped the sack of flour. It burst, a white cloud in the gray mud. She used the skills Elias had taught her. She did not pull away. She drove her boot heel down, hard, onto the man's instep. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for just a second. It was all she needed. She drew the pistol. It was heavy, but her hand was steady. The man saw the gun. He stopped sneering. He saw the look in her eyes. He lunged, trying to grab her wrist, thinking she was a girl, thinking she would not shoot. Lila did not pull the trigger. She squeezed. The explosion was flat and ugly in the narrow alley. The man stopped, his body jerking. He looked down at his chest, a dark, spreading flower blooming on his shirt. He looked at her, his eyes full of a terrible, final surprise. He fell to his knees, then pitched forward into the muddy flower. Lila stood there, the gun smoking in her hand. Her breath was coming in ragged, painful gasps. She had done it again. She had killed another man. She heard a shout from the street. "Gunshot! In the alley!" She did not wait. She ran, leaving the salt, grabbing the reins of the bay. She swung herself into the saddle and dug her heels in, the horse leaping forward, back out into the open, toward the mountains, toward Elias. She burst through the cabin door, the horse's panicked breath fogging the air behind her. Elias was on his feet, his own pistol in his hand, his face pale with strain. He had heard her riding too fast. She stumbled in, slamming the door, barring it. She was shaking from head to toe. Her face and coat were spattered. "Lila," he said, his voice low. "What happened? Are you hurt?" She just looked at him, her eyes wide with a terrible, vibrating shock. She was holding the pistol so tight, her knuckles were white. "They know," she whispered. The words came out, torn. "There is a bounty, $500, for you, for murder." She took a shuddering breath. "And a marshal, a U.S. Marshal. He is hunting us. She began to shake harder. He says you abducted me. He says I am contracted property. He says I am a runaway." The word hung in the air. Property. Elias's face went hard as granite. He looked at the smoking pistol in her hand. He looked at the fresh blood spattered on her cheek. He did not have to ask. He knew. He walked to her, slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse. He put his good hand over hers, the one holding the gun. "Lila," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Let it go." Her fingers would not uncurl. "Give me the gun! Lila!" Slowly, her hand unspasmed, the heavy pistol dropped into his... She stood there, vibrating, on the edge of breaking. I killed him. Elias. He tried to take me. He tried to drag me to his wagon. He called me. "Hush," Elias said. He let the pistol fall. He stepped close. He was still weak, his side screaming in protest, but he did not care. He took his neckerchief. He dipped it in the cold water basin, and very gently, he began to clean her face. He wiped the blood from her cheek. He wiped it from her forehead, from her chin. His touch was rough, but it was indescribably gentle. He cleaned the filth of the world from her. When her face was clean, he did not step back. He held her head in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. He looked into her eyes, seeing the terror and the steel and the broken pieces. He bent his head and he kissed her. He kissed her forehead. He kissed each cheek. He kissed her eyelids. It was not a kiss of passion. It was an absolution. It was a promise. He held her. "You are not property," he whispered into her hair. "You are not a thing. You are Lila." She sagged against him, her first dry, racking sob breaking against his chest. He held her until the shaking stopped. Then he held her back at arm's length. "This is it," he said, his voice low and hard. "This is the life I gave you, that marshal, that bounty. It will not stop. They will hunt us. They will hunt us until we are dead, or until they have you in chains." He looked at the door, then back at her. "You can still go back. The mission, go to the marshal. Tell him I took you. Tell him I forced you. They will believe you. You can be safe." Lila looked up at him. She saw the pain in his side. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes. She saw the man who had cleaned the blood from her face. "You want to run?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I have to run," he said. "And leave me?" "I will leave you if it makes you safe." She shook her head, a small, fierce motion. The fire was back in her eyes. "Only if you run with me," she said. He searched her face, looking for any hint of doubt. He found none. He found only the same hard resolve that lived in his own gut. He had not just saved her. He had forged her. He nodded once. "All right, we run." They were no longer Elias and Lila, a drifter and a runaway. They were a single unit, bound by blood and gunfire. "My brother," she said, her voice finding its strength. "Ladeville, Colorado. The sister said he was there." "North," Elias said. "It is as good a direction as any. We will get new horses. We will need new names." He looked at her, a different kind of look. Not as a girl he was protecting, but as his partner. "We travel as man and wife. It is the only way." "Mr. and Mrs. Stone," Lila said, the names coming to her, solid and plain. "John and Abigail Stone." "John and Abigail," Elias repeated. He liked the sound of it. "We leave tonight." The journey was a blur of cold and fear. They traded their horses and their last remaining money for 2 sturdy mules and a pack horse in a town where no one knew their faces. They traveled north, into Wyoming territory. It was a long, bitterly cold road. They moved at night, sleeping in frozen creek beds or abandoned sheds during the day. Elias's side throbbed, a constant reminder of their flight. Lila was his rock. She tended his wound. She took the first watch, every night, the rifle across her lap.
They avoided the main roads, but they could not avoid the towns. They needed food. They needed ammunition. It was in a small, wind-blasted town on the Green River that the world showed them its true face. They were coated in grime, their clothes ragged, their face hollow with hunger. They had a few dollars left from a pelt Elias had sold. They just wanted a hot meal and a bed for one night. The inn was small. A man sat behind the desk, his face sour. He looked at Elias. Then his eyes moved to Lila. His gaze lingered, cold and full of judgment. "We need a room," Elias said, his voice rough from the cold. "We are full," the innkeeper said, his eyes flat. The vacancy sign hung on the wall behind him. "The sign says you have a room." Elias pressed, his hand instinctively moving toward his coat, where his pistol was hidden. "The sign is wrong," the innkeeper said. He leaned forward. "We do not serve your kind here. We are a respectable place. Take your woman and get out. You can try the livery. They might let you sleep in the hay." Lila flinched, her face hardening. She grabbed Elias's arm before he could speak. "Come on, John," she said, her voice hard, using their new name. "It is fine." As they turned to leave, a man at a table by the stove laughed, his voice loud enough to fill the small room. "That is a hard ride, friend," the man called out. "Just to get a piece of that." A half-dozen other men laughed. The slur hung in the air, thick and ugly. Lila stopped, her back rigid. Elias turned. His movement was slow, deliberate. The room went silent. The men saw his eyes. They were not the eyes of a drifter. They were the eyes of a killer. "What did you say?" Elias asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The man's smile faltered. He had not expected this. "John," Lila said, her voice a sharp command. "No, please, it is not worth it." She pulled on his arm. Hard. "Please, let us go." Elias looked at the man's frightened, stupid face. He looked at Lila, her eyes begging him. He let her pull him away. He let her lead him out of the inn, back into the biting, unforgiving wind. The liveryman was an old man who did not care about anything but the silver dollar Elias pressed into his hand. He pointed to an empty stall. "There, do not make a fire, and be gone by sunup." "Thank you," Elias said. The stall was dark, shielded from the worst of the wind. It smelled of hay and horses. It was the first time they had been under a real roof in weeks. Elias took their 2 thin blankets and piled hay in the corner, making a deep, soft bed. He made a nest for them. They crawled into it, pulling the blankets over them, huddling together for warmth. And in the cold, dark silence, the weight of the last month, the killings, the running, the hatred, the slur from the inn, it all came crashing down. Lila turned her face into his chest, and her body began to shake. She did not make a sound, but a deep, terrible, silent sob racked her. She was not crying for the man she had killed. She was crying for the world that had made her kill him. She was crying because she was property. Elias held her, his own throat thick, his eyes burning. He felt a tear track down his weathered cheek and disappear into her hair. He held her, and he cried with her. They cried for Beth, the girl who had died in the cave. They cried for the boy, Pip. They cried for the people they had been, and the people they were now, 2 ghosts running in the snow. They lay like that for a long time, until the crying was done, leaving them raw and empty in the dark. Elias lay on his back, staring up at the dark rafters. Lila was curled against his side, her breathing finally steady. "My sister," Elias whispered. The words came out of him, a confession he had not made in 25 years. Her name was Sarah. Lila stirred, turning her head to look at him. "She was 9, he said, his voice thick. "Raiders, the kind that do not just steal, they break things. They came to the house. I was supposed to be watching her. But I was 15, and I went to the creek to go fishing." He paused.
the memory still so sharp. It cut him. When I got back, she was just a little girl. He closed his eyes. They were men like Croft, like that man in the alley today. Men who look at a person and see a thing to be used, a thing to be broken. He took a ragged breath. I failed her. I ran from that. I failed that family in Tennessee. During the war, I just watched. I did nothing. He turned his head, his eyes meeting hers in the dark. But I saved you. Lila, I know it does not make up for any of it. It does not bring Sarah back. But I did not fail this time. I came back. I saved you. Lila listened to his words, his voice thick with a lifetime of guilt. She heard the truth he was not saying. Saving her was the one good thing he believed he had ever done. She thought of the whip scars on his back. She thought of the wound in his side, the one her own hands had stitched. She reached out, her fingers finding the hard, puckered ridge of the new scar through his thin shirt. She traced it, a simple, possessive gesture, a claim. "And you're mine now," she whispered. It was not a question. It was not a statement of ownership. It was a fact. He had saved her life. She had saved his. They were bound, one to the other. He pulled her closer, his hand in her hair, and they fell asleep in the hay. They pushed north, into Colorado, the hope of finding her brother. Jacob was a small, warm fire that kept Lila going. It was the one piece of her old life, her true life, that might still exist. Elias saw the change in her. With every mile that brought them closer to Leadville, a little more of the haunted look left her eyes. They came into the high mountain territory in the late spring. The snow was finally retreating, and the ground was a sea of mud. But there were rumors of silver everywhere. The air was thin and sharp. They found the freight line that Sister Angeline had mentioned. Elias, calling himself John Stone, did the talking. He asked the freight master about a young man named Jacob, who had worked the line a few years back. The freight master, a weary man with a pencil behind his ear, squinted. Jacob? Jacobo, the colored boy. Strong kid, quiet. Yeah, I remember him. Good worker. Lila, standing by the door, held her breath. Her hands were clenched so tight, her nails bit into her palms. He ain't here no more, the freight master said, turning back to his ledger. Left 2, maybe 3 years ago. Got some pay and said he was going to prove up on a claim. Bought a small homestead. I heard, out past the river, on the high slope. He gave them directions. Lila was trembling when they left the office. He is here, Elias, she whispered, her voice thick. He is here. They rode for 2 hours, following a faint track up into a high, beautiful valley. The air was clean, and the world was quiet. They saw the cabin, small and built of raw pine, sitting near a stand of aspen. Lila slid off the mule before it even stopped, and she ran. She did not feel her bad leg. She did not feel the mud. Jacob, she called. Jacob, it is me. The cabin was empty. The door was off one hinge, swinging in the wind. Inside, it was just a shell, a broken stool, a rusted stove. He was gone. He is not here, Lila said, her voice small. She turned, her shoulders slumping. Elias was walking slowly, his eyes scanning the ground. He was looking at the small plot of land beside the cabin, where the grass was a different color. It was a rectangle. He stopped. There was a cross, made of 2 aspen branches, lashed together with rawhide. It was grayed by the weather. Lila, he said, his voice quiet. She walked over to him, her feet heavy, as if she were walking through deep water. She saw the grave. She saw the carving in the wood. It was rough, but the letters were clear. Jacob, 1872. The fire in her went out. The hope, the thing that had pulled her across 1,000 miles of snow and fear, was gone. It was just ashes. She did not cry. She just stood there, her body hollow. She sank to her knees in the mud beside the simple grave. Her brother, The last person in the world who was hers. He had been here. He had been free. And he had died. Alone. In this cold, empty valley. She put her hand on the wooden cross. It was all over. "There is no place for me," she whispered. The words were a simple fact. She was not property. She was not a slave. She was just nothing. A ghost. Elias stood behind her, his heart breaking. He had no words. He knew that words were useless. He had failed again. He had brought her here, to this last, final heartbreak. He knelt behind her in the mud. He did not say, "I am sorry." He did not say, "It will be all right." He just put his arms around her. He held her, his body a solid, warm wall against her back. He held her while she stared at the wood, her body rigid, her soul gone. He just held her, and he did not let go. After a long time, she leaned her head back against his chest. She was not crying, but a long, slow shudder ran through her. "There is no place," she said again, her voice dead. "Yes, there is," Elias whispered, his voice rough, his arms tightening. "There is me. There is us." She turned in his arms, her face buried in his coat, and she finally broke. She wept. She wept for her mother, for Beth, for the men she had killed, and for the brother she had never had the chance to find. And Elias just held her, a silent, unmoving guardian in the high, lonely valley. They were in the small town at the base of the valley, buying flour and bacon. When the world caught up, they were in the Mercantile. John and Abigail Stone, two quiet homesteaders. A man bustled in, his face red with excitement, and tacked a poster to the wall. "Marshal Harmon is here," the man announced to the store. "He is at the saloon. Says he has got a warrant for a killer named Elias Granger, and he is offering a $50 reward for any word on him or the runaway girl he is traveling with. Says Granger is armed and dangerous, and the girl is his property. Says he will see Granger hang." Lila dropped the tin of coffee. It hit the floor with a loud clang. Elias grabbed her arm. "Easy," he murmured. He paid for their supplies, his hand steady, his eyes cold. He guided her out, his body shielding her from view. They got to the mules. "We ride," he said, his voice low. "Where, Elias?" she asked, her voice shaking. "He is a marshal. He has the law. He will not stop. He will follow us forever." "He will have to," Elias said, shoving the flour into a saddlebag. They rode hard, back toward the mountains, but they were too late. As they cleared the town, they saw them. A posse. 5 men with the sun gleaming on a badge at their front. They were coming up the valley road. The man from the Mercantile had seen them. He had recognized Elias. "They have seen us," Lila said, her voice frantic. "Elias, split up. Go. They want you, not me. If you are alone, you can get away. You are faster." "Stop talking," he said, pulling his mule into a stand of trees. "No!" she screamed, pulling her own mule to a halt. "You have to listen. He will hang you, because of me. It is all my fault. Please, Elias, leave me. I am begging you. Let me go. It is the only way you will be free." Elias turned his horse. He rode back and grabbed her reins. He looked at her, his face a mask of terrible, cold anger. But the anger was not for her. "I am not leaving you," he said, each word a stone. "I will not. Do you understand me? We finish this. Together." He did not wait for an answer. He pulled her horse, and they ran. But the posse's horses were fresh. Theirs were not. The men were fanned out, cutting off the pass. They were trapped. Elias scanned the hills. He saw it, on a low rise, silhouetted against the graying sky. A ruin, a small mission church, burned out years ago. Only the stone walls and the bell tower remained. "There," he pointed. "We can hold them there."
They reached the church just as the first shots rang out, bullets whining high over their heads. They half fell from the mules, slapping them on the rumps to send them running, and scrambled inside the ruin. It was a small, roofless square of stone. A heavy, fire-blackened altar lay on its side, a perfect piece of cover. "Get in the cellar," Elias said, breathing hard. He pointed to a dark square hole in the floor, where the stairs had been. "Get down there and stay down, no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" He was checking his rifle. He had 20 rounds. Lila had the pistol, with 6. Lila looked at the dark hole. She looked at him. She saw the wound on his shoulder, still stiff. She saw the lines of pain and exhaustion on his face. She saw him, planning to die for her. "No," she said. "Lila, do not argue with me. Not now. Get in the hole." "No." Her voice was quiet, but it was as hard as the stone around them. "I am not a child to be hidden in a cellar. I am not a thing to be put in a dark hole while you die for me." She drew the heavy pistol from her belt. "I am not contracted property. I am not a runaway. I am your wife," she said, using the name that had become their truth. "I stand with my husband." She checked the loads in the pistol, her small hands sure and steady. Elias looked at her. The terror was gone. The doubt was gone. In her eyes, he saw only that same fire he had seen in the alley in San Judas, the fire he had refused to let the world put out. A grim, terrible pride filled his chest. He nodded once. "All right, Abigail," he said, using her name. "Watch the south wall." They took their places, back to back, behind the fallen altar. The posse circled the ruin. They heard the horses, the jingle of harness. Elias Granger. The voice was loud, full of authority. "This is Marshal Harmon. You are surrounded. I have a warrant for your arrest for murder and abduction. Give up the girl and come out with your hands high." Elias looked at Lila. He put his hand on her shoulder. Then he called out, his voice clear and carrying. "Her name is Lila. She is not a girl. She is my wife, and she is a free woman." There was a moment of silence. Then the marshal's voice came back, cold as ice. "So be it. Open fire." The world exploded. Bullets slammed into the stone walls, sending chips of granite flying like shrapnel. The air filled with gun smoke and the screams of men. Elias was calm. He was back in the war, but this time, he knew what he was fighting for. He rose, aimed his Winchester, and fired. A man screamed and fell from his saddle. Let_assistant_thought. Elias rose, aimed, and fired. A man screamed and fell from his saddle. "Two by the east wall!" Lila yelled, her voice high and clear over the noise. Elias dropped, worked the lever, and rose again. He fired. Another man cried out. He was moving. Lila was calling targets. They were a team. Then, a deputy, braver than the others, made a run for the broken doorway. Elias turned to fire, but he was too slow. A bullet hit him, high in the left shoulder. It was a sledgehammer blow. It spun him around and slammed him into the stone wall. He slid to the ground, his rifle clattering on the paving stones. The world went gray. "Elias!" Lila screamed. The marshal and the deputy saw him fall. "He is down!" Harmon yelled. "Move in! Get the girl!" Lila did not panic. She saw Ellis, slumped, his eyes closed, blood pouring from his shoulder. She saw the two men rushing the door. She grabbed Elias by the collar of his coat, her strength multiplied by pure, cold rage. She dragged him, his full weight, behind the heavy stone altar. He grunted, his eyes flickering. The deputy was in the doorway, his pistol raised. Lila dropped Elias. She grabbed her own pistol. She rose up from behind the altar, her arm extended, both hands on the grip, just as Elias had taught her. "Squeeze, breathe out." She aimed for the biggest target, the marshal. He was right behind his deputy. She fired
The heavy pistol bucked in her hand. The shot was deafening. Marshal Harmon cried out, not in death, but in sharp, sudden pain, and crumpled to the ground. Grabbing his leg, he was down. The deputy, stunned, looked at his wounded boss, then at the woman. This slip of a girl, standing over her fallen man, her pistol smoking, her face a mask of fury. The fight was over. The other men had lost their stomach for it. There was a long, terrible silence. The wind whistled through the ruined church. Elette_assistant_thought. There was a long, terrible silence. The wind whistled through the ruined church. Elias was conscious, barely. He was on his back, his head on Lila's lap. He was trying to lift his pistol, but his arm would not obey. Lila was in front of him, shielding him with her body. Her pistol was empty, but she held it pointed at the doorway, her arm trembling, her eyes daring them to come closer. Marshal Harmon lay on the ground, 10 yards away, his leg bleeding badly. His deputy was kneeling beside him, trying to staunch the blood. Harmon looked at them. He looked at the scene. He saw his bounty poster in his mind. Elias Granger, killer, runaway property. Then he looked at what was actually in front of him. He saw a wounded man, and he saw a woman who had just shot a UEOAS, Marshal to protect him. She was not chained. She was not frightened. She was defending her place. Elias, in a spasm of pain, reached up, his good hand finding Lila's. He held it. Lila did not look down. She just kept her eyes on the Marshal, her fingers lacing with Elias's. The Marshal saw it. He saw the way the man's hand found hers. He saw the way she stood over him, like a lioness over her cub. He saw a man who was holding a woman, not like a captive, but like she was the last sacred thing in a broken world. He was a hard man, Marshal Harmon, but he was not a fool. He had been lied to. This was not a kidnapping. This was something else, something his warrant did not cover. He grunted, the pain in his legs sharp. "Tim," he said to his deputy, "help me up." "Marshal?" the deputy asked, confused. "What about them?" "What about them?" Harmon rasped, pulling himself up. "Granger is dead, or will be. The girl is gone. We lost them in the snow. Do you understand me? Deputy!" The deputy looked at the Marshal. He looked at the 2 bleeding people behind the altar. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, Marshal, we lost them. A hard winter." "Get the men," Harmon ordered. "We are riding out." He looked one last time at Lila and Elias. He did not say a word. He just turned, leaning on his deputy, and limped away. Months passed. The snows came, deep and heavy, sealing the high passes. The world forgot about a burned-out church and a failed posse. The snows melted. The world turned green. High in the mountains, in a valley that was not on any map, there was a small cabin. It was hidden in a stand of thick pine, the smoke from its chimney a thin, pale whisper against the blue sky. A woman was in the dirt. Her hands, scarred from old ropes and new calluses, were covered in rich, black earth. She was planting a garden, beans, squash, and corn. She moved with a slow, careful pace. This was Lila. On the porch, a man sat in a chair he had built himself. He was thinner, and the gray in his beard was now more white than black. His left shoulder was stiff, and he moved it carefully. He was carving a piece of pine. He was not a good carver, but the small, rough shape in his hand was, unmistakably, a bird. This was Elias. He watched her. He watched her press the seeds into the earth. He watched her stand up and wipe her hands on her apron. She looked at him. Elias smiled. It was not a grin. It was not a laugh. It was a rare, small, real easing of the hard lines around his eyes. It was a smile that reached all the way up to his pale blue eyes. Lila saw it, and she smiled back, a real smile. It lit her face, and for a moment, She was not the woman who had been in the wagon. She was just a woman, in her own garden, looking at her man. They lived quietly. They spoke little because they did not need to. They were healing. That night, a cold snap came down from the peaks. The fire in the hearth was bright. They sat before it, Elias in his chair, Lila on a rug at his feet, her head resting on his knee. The cabin was warm. It was safe. Lila looked into the flames. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice a murmur, not in pain or in anger, but as a simple statement of a lifelong past. "I was meant to be sold," she whispered. Elias stopped his carving. The knife and the wood fell from his hands. He leaned down. He slid his good arm under her knees and his scarred arm around her back, and he lifted her. She was light in his arms. He stood up, her in his grasp, and sat back down in the chair, pulling her onto his lap, holding her as if she were a child. He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, her head tucked under his chin. He held her, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and soap. "You're mine now," he whispered, his voice a low, rough promise against her temple. "And I do not trade treasure." Thank you for listening to our story tonight around the Wild West Campfire. We would love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a comment to let us know where you are listening from.